How a Woman Put Two Robbers to Flight by S.C. Turnbo. The writer has mentioned the Bull Bottom in these sketches and on several occasions. As is well known in Marion County, Arkansas, this bottom is situated on the left bank of the White River in Cedar Creek Township. Now, I am informed that George Weaver made the first settlement here. Now, Weaver sold the improvements on this land to Old Man John Terry, the first settler on the C.S.A. place, and Mr. Terry gave the improvements to his sons, Tom and Ron Terry. After Tom Terry's wife died and Wilshire Magnus died, Mr. Terry and Wilshire's widow were married in 1860 and lived on this bottom until the ravages of the cruel war forced them to abandon their home there. Now, when Mr. Terry was enlisted in the Union Army, his wife, whose name was Elizabeth, was left alone with the children to contend against the hardships, thieves, and robbers. There were 6 children. There's Joe Magnus and Bob Magnus, children by her first man Wilshire Magnus. And there's Joe Terry, Dump Terry, and Mary Terry, which were Tom Terry's children by Mrs. Terry's first wife, who was the sister of Wilshire Magnus. And Tom Terry had an offspring of the marriage between Mr. Terry and Mrs. Magnus. The latter child was 6 months old. Mr. Terry's wife, in describing the hardships she encountered on this bottom while her and her children were staying there alone, said that one day the 2 men who were on horseback and well armed approached the house and rode up to the yard gate and stopped and demanded to know if she knew where the rebels were. She told them she did not know anything about them. After they had repeated the inquiry a few times, they reversed the questions to her, and they wanted to know if she knew where any feds were, and she answered in the negative. They were very inquisitive and continued to ask her questions until they found that they could not obtain any information from her. They then backed their horses from the gate, reined them around as if they were going to ride off, and stopped and held a whispered conversation, and then they started off down toward the lower part of the bottom. Mrs. Terry said, "I was convinced that they were gone off to procure help to rob the house and drive off the stock. I and Mr. Terry owned more than 100 head of cattle, which Terry kept on the range of the hills of Music Creek. This is just after we were married. But in 1862, the land pirates had taken just about all but a few of them and disposed of them. Mr. Isaiah Wilkerson, who lived on Music Creek just above the mouth, noticing the principal part of the cattle had been stolen, he gathered up the remainder, which included a few milk cows, and drove them across the river where we could find them. Now, the cows were giving milk, and the milk from the cows kept the children from starving. After the 2 men had left, I went to work with a determination to save my stuff in the house and my milk cows if I had to fight for the property, and with the help of the children that was old enough to do anything. And I went to work and carried out all of our household stuff into the house that had only one door. I forgot to mention there were 2 houses with a hall between them. Then I armed myself and the oldest children with something to fight with, such as a chopping axe, a hatchet, butcher knives, clubs, and so on. Then I and the children sit down and wait for the return of the bandits. And in a little while I saw the 2 same men coming back driving the milk cows before them. I saw at once that it was their intention to steal all we had, and I says, "Children, let us not let them scoundrels have an easy job taking our stuff from us." Now, when they had reached near the cow lot gate with the cattle, the calves began to bleat, and the children began to cry, for the little innocent and helpless children depended on the cows for a living. And when they realized that the robbers intended to take the cattle from us, we would all have to meet starvation and distress. My heart seemed to sink in despair, for I knew they had the power to drive them off, but I had set a resolution that I would fight to the last moment to save the cows in my household. The robbers were preparing to let the calves out to the cows and make ready to drive them off, and about the moment I was ready to interfere with their thievish plans, a thought came into my mind that I might get rid of them before they had time to ride roughshod over me and the children. And I put it into execution at once by snatching the dinner horn from where it was hanging on the wall in the hallway, and then I blew a loud blast with it, and then stopped for a moment and blew it a second time, and then I hallooed at the top of my voice and used these words, "Here they are! Come quick!" Then I repeated the blowing of the horn and yelled about the same words. The two marauders seemed to be awfully surprised and remounted their horses, and urging them into a gallop and run into the river bank and down into the water's edge, and plunged into the river, swam across to the opposite shore, up the bank they went, beyond my view. As they were getting away, I blew my horn and kept repeating the same words as loud as the strength of my lungs would admit. I had succeeded in bluffing them and saving my property from the rascals so far. No doubt they were fully convinced that a body of Federal soldiers were nearby ready to pounce on them. I learned afterward that these men never stopped until they reached the John Knight cabin in the range of the Short Mountain, which was used as a gathering place for a number of the Southern men in the war days. In a short time after this, I moved out into Missouri, where I received better protection from the unwelcome bandits and guerrillas. Mrs. Elizabeth Terry, after the death of Mr. Terry, married Henry Clark. Now she died at her old home in the southeast part of Taney County, Missouri, February 13th, 1907, and was buried in the graveyard at Pro Tem on the following day.